everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Classic Universal Horror Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Jennings. I am a Universal Horror collector and historian. And on this show, we always discuss classic Universal Horror actors and films and other topics of interest. And today's no exception. We're going to dedicate today's show to discussing those classic Universal Horror directors, the James Whales and the Todd Brownings and the Robert Florys and so forth and so on, who made those great films and with their vision. And to join me, as always, to talk about this is author and director Court Joyner. Courtney, hey, how's it going?
Hey, great. And I'm so glad we're doing this, Jay. This is like a favorite subject because we're always examining, not just us, but everybody's always examining Boris Karloff or Lon Chaney Jr. or Lugosi or whatever it is. And the fellas who actually guided those movies sometimes get shuttled aside a little bit, especially the ones who were doing the World War II films.
Right. And yeah, they don't get enough credit. It always goes to the Karloffs and the Lugosis. And but which is fine because they're the star of the movie. But it's about time that we recognize who these great directors were, and that's why we're paying tribute to them. And there's about 20 of them, and who directed all the Universal horror classics. They even did some Poverty Row too, but we did that on a previous show. And we're going to discuss kind of like their backgrounds and where they got started, which is a lot of them got started in the silent era, and a lot of them also got started being actors. A lot of them were they were, I guess, European immigrants, and they emigrated from Germany to get rid of, get out of Hitler's Europe, and they came to the United States and came to Hollywood, and they started off as actors or editors, and they worked their way up, and they directed. Some of them have directed dozens and dozens of movies, westerns and film noir and comedies and Charlie Chan movies, but we're here to discuss the Universal horror classics that they directed. Uh, what's interesting about them is that it's either they either died really late in life in their 80s or 90s, or they died young, and we'll discuss that. We'll go over each one's age, which I always think is kind of an odd stat, and a lot of them incorporated German Expressionism, which I think Universal's trademark was that. I think to join the club, to make a Frankenstein or a Dracula or the Mummy or the Wolfman, you had to know how to do that tilted Dutch angle and the weird shadows, and the German Expressionism, I think, was all par for the course. Why do you think that was, Court? Why do you think all these directors favored German Expressionism?
Well, of course, when these movies and the ones that we love really were going into production in the 1930s, the big artistic impact, I think, for a lot of these guys were films like whether it was either Nosferatu or The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And two, let's not forget again, so many of these uh, directors were European. So the influence of other European filmmakers was definitely going to be felt, certainly in the horror genre, because the films that were made during the silent period from Germany and the use of expressionism, etc., particularly in something like Caligari, was felt all across the industry at the time. And it was like an artistic movement. And these guys were, of course, also affected by that. And as you said, a lot of them, particularly if you go to somebody like Robert Flory, etc., they were making silent movies.
Right?
And whether they were, and in some like Edgar G. Ulmer worked on the Golem uh, for Paul Wagener. So, and he worked on Caligari. So that's the thing. They were all kind of intermingled, and the European background, which really can't be ignored because Carl Laemmle really made it possible for so many of these guys to get out of Germany, away from the way the politics were going, and find a place here in the United States. And not just the horror directors, also people like William Wyler and Billy Wilder and the Siodmak brothers. So all of that is all part, if you will, of the universal formula, and we can see why there was so much impact. I think from German expressionism on these movies.
And I'm glad there is because it adds so much to the film, to the films. You know, the castle and the lightning and the electricity and the deep shadows and the set decoration where the tilted houses are all kind of weird, like a fun house. I think that's what gave it its, I guess, its appeal. And so I think they're all on the same page. Whether I'm gonna break this down into three tiers. We have the top like 10 Universal horror directors. One of them behind me, Robert Flory, and directing The Beast with Five Fingers with Peter Lorre. And even though that wasn't Universal, it still falls into that genre. As I said, it's okay if they did a couple outside of Universal. I'm just including them all in. And then there's a middle tier of directors we've heard of, and then there's the honorable mentions where either they did a couple, like a Mummy movie or an Inner Sanctum with Lon Chaney. They still get included because that is part of the au revoir of Universal. But let's start with, I think, is known as kind of the. I mean, he didn't do a lot of them, but he did a lot of famous ones, of course. And we're talking about Todd Browning. And, you know, he worked a lot. First, he worked a lot with Lon Chaney Sr. Then he made quite a few films with him. And, of course, he did London After Midnight with the Lost London After Midnight. And, you know, Dracula, Freaks, Mark of the Vampire, and Devil Doll. Fascinating individual who's been written about in many books. And I know you're a big fan of his. And how do you think his legacy is when he made his imprint? I mean, without Todd Browning, I don't think we'd have anything to talk about as far as the guy who started it all. What do you say, Court?
No, I agree. And the thing is with Todd Browning, first of all, of course, he was an American. He was from Georgia, and he was a real two-fisted guy. I think that's why he and Cheney got along so well, and they had financial interests together in prize fighters and things like that. And but he was really top of the industry when Universal tapped him to direct Dracula. Browning had been a contract director at MGM, and that was big stuff. So for him to come to Universal, I don't want to say it was a step down, but it was a different financial tier, to use your word, than what he had been used to at MGM. And of course, because of his close association with Lon Chaney, and directed absolutely my personal favorite Lon Chaney silent film, The Unknown, which is just wild stuff. And Browning had circus work and carnival work in his background, which is why he did so well with films like Freaks and of course uh, you know in The Unknown, and he used that background, his own personal background. And we should note that Browning did not stay at Universal very long. He had directed another movie. It was a prize fight movie with Lou Ayres called Iron Man. And then he was back. And remember too, when he went back to MGM, uh, he gets aced almost immediately because he ends up doing Freaks, which literally freaked out Louis B. Mayer. He was absolutely furious about the movie. And they had problems getting it into theaters, and there was censorship and condemning from the Catholic Legion of Decency and all that stuff. And now, of course, it's regarded as just this absolute chilling classic. But he had worked with Bela Lugosi before, and in I believe the movie was it was either the Black Camel or the 13th Chair.
I think it was the 13th chair.
It was the 13th Chair, and he knew how to draw something out of Bela Lugosi. Kind of get through uh, the natural, if you will. He brought so much presence with himself, And Browning kind of wanted to use that, but also, you know, split it open to show another side of Lugosi and show the bestial side of him, which he does. Those wonderful shots of him zeroing in on Dwight Fry's cut finger and things like that in Dracula. This is not an aristocrat. That's a wild animal, and Browning was very good with that type of thing.
Right. And I think, thank goodness that Lugosi worked with Browning at the beginning. I mean, he could have worked with some of the, I won't use the word hack, but you know, a lot of the Monogram or PRC films later. I mean, good thing he didn't start with, you know, with William Bodine or somebody like that. I mean, that
Exactly.
good thing it came later, where he got, you know, Browning was a director, you know, an actor's director. You know, he knew exactly how to take someone's best qualities, and he probably knew about Lugosi, you know, having to learn the lines phonetically because he didn't have command of the English language, and he was the right person at the right time. But then again, Browning cut his teeth working with the earlier horror star, you know, Lon Chaney Sr. So he went from one, at the time, the biggest, you know, horror star in the world, and then he went to Lugosi. So I think it kind of helped, kind of cutting his teeth, making, you know, what is that, West of Zanzibar or whatever it was. Uh,
And oh, they did a lot of movies together. And I think the thing is too, of course, with again the carnival background and what have you. And he and Lon Chaney went to that several times in their films. With And Chaney always seemed to enjoy using that kind of background for whether it was Laugh Clown Laugh or He Who Gets Slapped or The Unholy Three. And so he and Browning had that in common. Now, when Browning went ahead and remade uh, London After Midnight, Mark of the Vampire is kind of problematic for a lot of people because it's essentially a comedy that I think is not particularly funny. And but then Browning working with James Wong Howe as his director of photography on that film, and there is just some stunning visual stuff in that
yeah,
movie.
the sets and the eeriness of it is incredible, definitely. I was just going to say that I personally like Mark of the Vampire. It's ruined by that ridiculous, silly ending, of course. But up until that last minute, it's a riveting. To me, it's a classic. It's in the top 25. I just think the sets and the acting and you know, the Luna, Carol Borland. I mean. I just think it's a great
And
film. It's underrated. What do you think, Court?
Luna flying is one of the great images, of 1930s horror films. And when she comes sweeping down, I mean, that's just terrifically well done. And Browning was, but again, was, he may have actually been more comfortable. He did very well with, I would say, bizarre stories, not necessarily horror films, but out of the ordinary, whether he was directing a gangster film or something like that. He always wanted to step outside the norm and look at characters and people who were either afflicted or there was something, internally wrong with them. That was always kind of part of his formula. And I know I did a movie with Angelo Rosito, and we talked about Todd Browning, and he liked him. Uh, he thought he was a really nice man, and Browning spent a lot of time with, of course, Angel is in Freaks, and he is, very famously one of us, and starts that chant at the dinner scene. But he got on very well with Browning, who seemed extremely comfortable with circus and carnival folk.
Yeah, I think that's where I read where that's what made Browning special too. He was into societal people. He was interested in the psychological aspects of people and human behavior, as opposed to just making a movie based on the script. He would delve deep into the ills of society and Freaks completely. covers that aspect of life. But it's a good beginning to start with Todd Browning. Now we go on to the second guy who is almost on that same pier almost. I mean, they're almost level, just maybe he's a little tad below, and that's James Whale, the great James Whale, of Frankenstein fame and Bride of Frankenstein and The Old Dark House. And he's a controversial figure. He's gay, but who cares about that? But it caused him problems, and he suffered from depression, and he was taking medication, and he was in a lot of pain. And of course, we know how his life ended in suicide by jumping into that pool. But outside of that, one of the great directors of all time, Cord. I mean, you can't take away Frankenstein, Bride, and The Old Dark House.
Well,
Oh, and
and
The
The
Invisible
Invisible Man.
Man.
Yeah, Whale obviously. I mean, he was an eccentric person, but the great, I think, thing with him, and it certainly plays through. Now, of course, he was British, is his sense of humor. He was much more noted, I think, for that than Todd Browning was for his. And certainly in something like Bride of Frankenstein, it's just absolutely glorious. And he had a beautiful eye. And uh, his, I think he was most comfortable, if you will, dealing with in his films with the British colony, which of course was very important uh, in Hollywood at this time, which is why later on, when he started doing swashbucklers like Man in the Iron Mask, he did them so well because, again, he just surrounded himself with his own troupe of people, whether it was E. E. Clive and Una O'Connor and Billy Bevan and all these great people, O.P. Hagee, Ernest Thesiger. And they were, his, if you will, intimate group. And so he was comfortable in his creative environment that way. Uh, I know Elsa Lanchester, Charles Lawton got to know Whale pretty well. And Elsa Lanchester used to say that, and she liked James Whale and she thought he was nice. And he had a great deal of money because of real estate investments. But she always said when she spoke about him that he was a bitter man. And Whale, unfortunately, with whether he was alienating people in the front office or what have you because of eccentric behavior and but more the cost overruns of his movies, particularly a film like Green Hell with Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and Joan Bennett and uh, George Sanders, uh, was a colossal bomb. And then he did a few others, and this is unfortunately at the right after Whale had done Showboat, which was one of the most successful movies that Universal had during the 1930s. So Whale was not just a one-hit wonder guy, but the alienating executives, plus he started doing some films that didn't do as well. That kind of started to, ace him out of opportunities.
Right. And let's get back to that comedy aspect of it. That's at the time, nobody, I mean, you had a screwball comedies, of course, and then later on the Bob Hope, movies and stuff. But I don't think anybody could make serious horror with comedic overtones like James Whale. And it's in all his
No.
films. It's in Frankenstein. It's in Bride of Frankenstein. It's in The Invisible Man, where he unwraps himself and starts laughing. I mean, that was James Whale's signature, was horror and comedy at the time. And I just think he was just one of the most fantastic directors there was. Not even taking into account, his personal matters, but just on the set, dealing with directors. I mean, he had such a command, of this genre. And as we were discussing, they all did other films besides horror, but I think James Whale was made for horror court.
Well, again, that eccentric streak that he had just seemed to fit into the movies so beautifully. particularly Bride, which is like a seminal masterpiece. I mean, absolutely incredible. And Whale was, I mean, he was a multi-talented guy, and I think too that the fact that he proved himself consistently, and yet, like when he directed the sequel to All Quiet on the Western Front and things like that, he was not, if you will, given, I think, ultimately the credit he deserved. Um, his version of Waterloo Bridge is tremendous, and it's the best performance Mae Clark gives in her entire career, and even has a young Betty Davis in it. And boy, it's just great. And everybody kind of forgets that stuff because how are you going to get out from under the shadow of the Bride of Frankenstein and the Invisible Man? Well, the reality is he wasn't going to.
Right. But in the end, I mean, that's what he's famous for. The trio or the four horror films that I mentioned, and his tragic ending. Of course, he was in a lot of pain, and so he wrote that famous suicide letter that wasn't, revealed until later in life, where he was in a lot of pain, and he just felt it would be better off, and he wrote, he said he was sorry, and he moved on into the next realm. But thank goodness for guys like Todd Browning and James Whale to get that horror genre going, even in the pre-code era. Otherwise, who knows where it would have ended up and landed. We would have to wait 40 years or 30 years for Hitchcock to come and do his kind of sort of odd horror. But it began with Browning and Whale. So anyway, speaking of continued great artists, was the director of photography Carl Freund, who we know he directed The Mummy, and he was the director of photography on a lot of movies. He was the DP on The Golem and on Dracula, Murders in the Rue Morgue, and he directed two films, The Mummy and Mad Love. Both are fantastic. I know you're going to mention some things about his personality, but as far as a filmmaker goes, Court, his eye for detail and the way he could set up a shot, I think, was second to none for that time period.
Oh, Carl Freund was amazingly talented, and I think that again, working with a director who was simpatico with him, as Todd Browning was on Dracula, uh, you see this wonderful symbiotic result of these images that they created. And then what he does in The Mummy is, this beautiful, romantic, uh, approach that is tied to the horror of it. I don't think anyone has matched just that incredible shot, the panic in Boris Karloff's eyes as he's being bandaged to be buried alive.
Right.
That's just an incredible thing. And Mad Love is, my God, that movie is out of its mind.
It
How
is.
they got away with that thing is absolutely amazing because
Yeah, it was
there's
brutal for the
so,
time.
oh my God, and there's so many erotic overtones to it and stuff that was defying censorship, and it's really incredible. And but they got it through.
Yeah, Carl Freund was one of those first, like James Wong Howe, to kind of introduce this kind of claustrophobic, up close filmmaking that just brought you into the film. I mean, back, when maybe you're watching an old Western or a John Wayne movie back in those days, or, something else of that nature. It was a time filler, but when Carl Freund, I think, introduced that kind of sheer terror, as you said, when he's getting his tongue taken out, and just all the beautiful how he was. I guess he had a fondness for Zita Johann, huh, Court?
Yes, he did, and I think he thought she was very special, and kind of kept, if you will, encouraging her to be a little looser in front of the camera and what have you. And and she was up to a point. It was funny because apparently she was very defiant of him at the same time while accommodating him. And I think that was very frustrating for him. And also, too, Zeta Johann was involved at one point with John Huston, and of course, Carl Freund shot Key Largo for Houston,
Right.
and
And I think, yeah, so Zeta,
he,
but it was like that was, she was his muse for that film.
I think so, absolutely, yeah.
Right. So let's go from Karl Freund to one of our favorite producer directors, and we discussed him briefly on a previous show, and that's George Wagner, and the great George Wagner, who was another immigrant, and he sometimes would have his name spelled with a small W and two big G's in the credit because he wanted to stand out. Because I think sometimes they would mistake it in the credits with one G, and that kind of got on his nerves. But he uh, he produced some great films, and then he went into directing. And let's see, yeah, we produced Ghost of Frankenstein and Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman and The Climax and Phantom of the Opera and then of course he directed The Wolfman and Horror Island. So he only directed two, but his signature is on all those films. I mean, it's German expressionism to the hilt. And I think he's one of the main, like Robert Florey, drips, his films drip with German expressionism. I mean, House of Dracula, House of Frankenstein, two of my favorites, of course. And sure, a little bit of tongue in cheek, but the shots of the houses and the village and the action sequences, and it's just he had a real good eye and sense for that kind of setup of horror. George Wagner Court,
Well, the thing is, you're forgetting Man-Made Monster,
man-made monster, of course.
and but the thing is, just like so many of these guys, I mean, they were contract guys, and they did what they were asked to do. And George Wagner directed a lot of westerns. He also wrote music for westerns. And so he would write a ditty for a thing, and he was back at Monogram and Republic, and he was grinding out these B pictures, but he had this great background with that stuff, and he knew how to direct action scenes very, very well. And Wagner had a long association also with John Wayne going into his Monogram period. And when the horror thing kind of ended for him at Universal, he ended up at Warner Brothers in the 50s directing Operation Pacific with John Wayne and Patricia Neal. And he also directed The Fighting Kentuckian with Wayne and Oliver Hardy. But he knew, uh, I think, not only what was cost effective, but his approach. I think it's real interesting. He never duplicated himself. Uh, the Wolfman, even though it does not look like Man-Made Monster. Man-Made Monster is a very American story, very contemporary, and all that stuff. And Dynamo Dan McCormick and what have you from a story by Harry Essex. And then the Wolfman, completely shrouded in fog. Uh, it's almost, and the whole thing is, even though we see Lon Chaney in the beginning of the film in a convertible, automobiles don't play a big part in the movie, and it almost seems like we've gone back in time in Lenwelly Village, where the Talbot estate is, and everything seems 100 years before, because of course you're dealing with a legend, and the movie starts with a legend, and I think that was very smart of Wagner with doing it that way, which separates the movie from certainly other films he directed. And things like Horror Island. Well, Horror Island is a wonderful, boys' adventure, monster, or if it will, heavy on the island, and it's a treasure hunt, and it's this and it's that. And you talk about a really efficient B movie, and that's who George Wagner was. He was a B movie maker who stepped, I think, beyond what his normal requirements were to make The Wolfman, and then settled back in as a producer on some of the absolute best sequels.
Right, and he was also a writer as well. Multi-talented, George Wagner. I mean, I think he took the reins from the Brownings and the Whales, and as you can see, it's kind of like different kind of time periods where you from the early 30s or the the 20s with the silent films, and then the 30s, and then Wagner took it into the 40s. Uh, as I said, the House of Dracula is the House of Frankenstein. It's just it was in good hands. Universal was in good hands at the time, and I'm glad someone like George Wagner was there to do it, to bring us those great films, which is a good segue because he produced for I think one of your favorite directors and one of mine, Earl C. Ketton. So Earl C. Ketton was able to do Island of Lost Souls. I mean, what I mean, one of the great pre-code movies of all time. He had and of course, Ghost of Frankenstein, House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula. I made it be clear, George Wagner produced those two. Earl C. Ketton,
Actually, it was Paul Malvern
Paul Maverick did
did
what?
those movies, produced those two movies.
Oh, okay. I don't want to get confusing, but anyway, um, but Earl C. Kenton had such a visual flair as well, and he was in a lot of genres. He didn't just stick to horror. Tell us about
Yeah.
his
Well,
adventures at
including,
Universal.
no, Jay, you're absolutely right, including Abbott and Costello. I mean, Earl Kenton, when he was at Paramount, he was, I think, really being groomed, like Henry Hathaway, to come up through the ranks. And with Island of Lost Souls, just an incredible job, and just created something so tremendous. And I think the next steps for Kenton was, were they going to trust him with a Gary Cooper feature or something with George Raft or what have you? And but when he went to Universal, it was World War II. Universal was grinding out a lot of movies, but they were on a different budget tier than what Kenton was doing at Paramount. And Universal had him all over the place. He with Abbott Costello, he did Pardon My Sarong, and Universal had done a big remake of the Rex Beach novel, The Spoilers, which had been a very famous silent movie. And they had just done a remake with John Wayne, Randolph Scott, and Marlena Dietrich. So we've got these sets. Let's make another one, only on a smaller budget. So they made North to the Klondike with Lon Chaney and Broderick Crawford and Evelyn Ankers. And there's a wonderful magazine ad with the three of them on the set of North to the Klondike, getting ready for Earl C. Kenton, and they're all drinking Pepsi. And I've always loved that. But when Kenton took on the reins of doing Ghost of Frankenstein, and you're right, George Wagner producing it, and kind of overseeing, because to step in to do another follow up, this time to Son of Frankenstein, that was a that was a big challenge, because Son of Frankenstein had been incredibly successful, and this was going to be a movie in the Frankenstein saga without Boris Karloff playing the monster. Of course, it was Lon Chaney, and with the Universal contract players in support, Ralph Bellamy and Lionel Atwill and Evelyn Ankers and all these wonderful people, and of course Bela Lugosi repeating his role as Igor. But Ghost of Frankenstein is a really nicely made movie, and I think that was because Wagner and Kenton took the assignment of following up on Son of Frankenstein really seriously and tried to figure things out, even though they didn't have anywhere near the same money. Uh-oh, Jay, I lost your audio.
Okay, here I am. I was saying,
There you are.
yes, Kenton and Wagner worked together well. I just had audio out, folks. I'm glad I'm back. They worked together well, and they were able to take the universal lineage of horror into the next realm after the early years of, Son of Frankenstein. There's no Karloff. So what do you do? And so they, made an two all-star cast movies after Ghost of Frank. Even Ghost of Frankenstein's almost an all-star cast because you have Lionel
I know.
Atwill and you got Lugosi, and you have everybody who's in that film, Ralph Bellamy and Sir Cedric Hardwicke. So it's still, you could even throw that in with the House of Dracula, House of Frankenstein. It's almost like a three films of that same ilk. Court, am I right on that?
Oh yeah, and again, these guys were bottom line guys, and they would look at the budgets that they had, and with somebody like George Wagner as the producer, they would say, "Okay, we have this much money. How can we stretch it? What can we do to make it, you know, not look as cheap as it actually is?" And push the envelope a little bit. And it was the small touches that counted. I think there's a wonderful moment in Ghost of Frankenstein where they use clips from Frankenstein and they show the monster on the table when he was bandaged when he was first created, and they do the unwrapping, and it's Lon Chaney under the bandages, not Boris Karloff. So they shot that specifically to be cut into this old footage, and I always thought that was just wonderful. Uh oh, I lost you again.
Having some weird audio problems. Hopefully, folks, that'll go away. Anyway, I was
There you
saying,
are.
I think it was expected. I mean, Karloff's not in the film. Chaney is the new horror star. Here he is. The bandages are coming off, and it's Lon Chaney Jr. and it works well. The whole film works well. Even the ending where the transplant the monster's brain, Igor's brain, into the monster, and of course they didn't take into account that the eyes and the visuals and the brain, stem couldn't take it all, and so the fire starts, and what
Oh,
happens.
of
But
course. What
um,
good is a brain with eyes that cannot see?
I've been waiting all show for that, Court. But Earl C. Kenton, great director who, as I said, took the universal horror lore of the 30s into the 40s and continued it on a successful level. Anyway, Court, our
and
next director, Court, is, I think, your good friend Reginald Leborg, and Reggie. I think, if I'm not mistaken, is probably, out of all the people that we've talked about, has probably directed more Universal horror films than anyone on the list, beginning with Calling Dr. Death, Dead Man's Eyes, Jungle Woman, The Mummy's Ghost, and Weird Woman. I don't think anyone's directed five or six Universal horror films, and this is outside of his work, outside of Universal, which I know you're going to go over. But he was a prolific writer, loved to write. He wrote screenplays on spec. This is what he's famous for. He just loved to write, but he knew his role, Cord. He knew not to overstep his bounds. He knew the B pictures was his thing. Yes, he wanted to make A pictures, but he knew where his lot was in life. And he was kind of treated unfairly by the studio heads. They should have actually let him direct more A pictures, Court.
well, that was the thing. Reggie had come to Universal through the shorts department, and his opportunities to do features came from the producer Ben Pivar. Now, we're getting up. There we go. He actually gave me that photograph. Uh, Reg, this was the thing. This was. It's interesting because he became so much a part of the unit that was doing the Inner Sanctum movies from the radio show, and here is, if you will, home front horror. This is during World War II. These are very, if you will, American thrillers, American films. All of the directors were expats. They were all from immigrants from other countries. Reggie was from Vienna. So, here's this incredibly American series all made by these immigrants from other countries. And they do this really good, credible job. And he used to argue with Ben Pivar, he told me quite a bit, just because he wanted to do things in a more unusual way than Pivar was comfortable with. Now, Ben Pivar was British, and his brother, Maurice Pivar, was head of Universal Editorial for years and years and years. And they would always just say, Reg, why are you fighting this? Just go ahead and just shoot it. And he would never settle for that. And he always wanted to do something slightly different, i.e., the end of the mummy's ghost, where Ramsey Ames, this is from Lost Horizon, of course, ages and dies at the end of the movie when she sinks into the swamp with Kyrus as he's carrying her away. And I always thought that was really to his credit. But he also knew he was kind of, if you will, doomed at Universal just because he had done such a good job on the Inner Sanctums and with movies like Weird Woman and stuff like that. That Ben Pivar held on to him with a death grip and was not about ready to let him step away to do other things. He was going to be there working on through. Now, he did do some shorts for the musical department, including one called Heavenly Music, which won an Academy Award. And he was very proud of that. But they really clamped him down. One of his favorite films was one of the comedies that Universal was grinding out by the yard called San Diego, I Love You, starring Louise Albritton and Robert Page and Buster Keaton. And he loved making that movie. But again, it was a small film. It was a 14-day shoot to go out on a double bill. And I think you're right. I think they kept him hemmed in, and which I think was a shame. They didn't really take advantage of his talent and everything else, and that didn't really come to the fore until he got out of there.
Yeah, he was. But you know what? He was a trooper because I was reading some background. He knew what it was about. He understood the politics of the studio system back then, and he went with it, which more patience than you and I would have had back in the day. But I thought he always brought a lot of class and I guess surrealism. Always something kind of weird in his movies. Calling Doctor Death is crazy. I
Oh
mean,
God, that wonderful sequence when the walls of the alley come down. Just wonderful and almost crush Patricia Morrison, and it's I and he was so good with I think his actresses. He got really good work from Pat Morrison, who was a really lovely lady, and he got good work from Ramsey Ames. He didn't think so. Uh, but I think she's very good in calling Doctor Death, and of course she was so beautiful, that. But he had her work hard on the Mummy's Ghost. He always felt a little well. He tried very hard because he liked Aquanetta very very much, but he was kind of, if you will, limited by her limitations. And she was a very nice woman, but at least as a young actress, she, didn't exactly light up the screen particularly, other than, how beautiful she was. And he struggled with that. And he, as he said, look, sometimes they didn't even give him much choice in casting. These are the people who are going to be in your film because these are the people we have under contract. Work with him. And there you go. And he got along well with Lon Chaney, even though, with the Lon had started a little bit with the drinking and stuff. But they got on very well, and as Reggie always said, he said he liked Lon Chaney because Lon Chaney thought he had talent and would cooperate with him.
right. No, they work well together. They made quite a few films together, and you can
They
see,
did.
right, you can see the camaraderie. Um, they're just good movies. Weird Woman, Dead Man's Eyes. They're just very competent thriller slash horror films for the time. And the Universal horror film was in good hands with Reggie LeBorg, who went on, to make a lot of films after that. And but his contribution to Universal horror should not go un, I guess, unrealized because he really was really good. He probably could have done some more for them, but as I said, he was a trooper. He was a company man, and he did what he was told. But great prolific writer. So let's move on, Court, to another one of my favorite directors, the director of Son of Frankenstein, and that's Roland V. Lee. And Son of Frankenstein and Tower of London. I mean, he just did two, but they're just two knockout, top of the line, top tier Universal horror films, and they reek of just gothic realism. And very talented director, knew how to work with actors. And I mean, Son of Frankenstein. I mean, people were worried after Frankenstein and Bride, what's going to happen next? I mean, Son of Frankenstein is surprisingly brilliant, Court. You're worried, what could have happened? Did they go wrong? No, the monster, wore a wool sweater now, but he was still just as sinister and mean. And outside the little kid, well, hello, which we've discussed in previous shows. I mean, he still picks him up, and you hear that weird oboe and violin sound every time he would come and creep into the kid's room. So Roland V. Lee, another competent director who took Universal horror in the next direction, Court.
Well, the thing is with Roland V. Lee, he was very suited for epics, and of course would do uh, uh, well. James Whale had done Man in the Iron Mask, and Roland V. Lee was very much in that world, that swashbuckling world, and he had a beautiful eye for something that was larger, if you will, and I think it just shows through because, of course, there have been all the presuppositions about whether Son of Frankenstein to be done in color or not, and that affected those beautiful sets. And also, George Robinson was brought in to shoot it, and he became the cameraman for Universal Horror for like the next 7 or 8 years. And but Roland V. Lee also, of course, as we know, he saw what Bela Lugosi was doing, and I believe Lugosi was contracted to only work for a week on Son of Frankenstein, and Roland V. Lee made sure that he worked the entire movie and got that money. So very generous guy.
Right, and you're right. Lugosi was contracted for a short term, but a lot of these directors like, wait a minute, this is Bela Lugosi, and he's doing a fantastic Igor, and we're going to keep him on. And it happens a lot in Hollywood where an actor is only hired for a small role, and yet because of their performance in the ongoing filming as the days progress, it's like, no, wait a minute, we got to keep this actor on. So Roland V. Lee was a good guy for that, but his technique and his eye for detail. And it's just, he was also, there's a little bit of humor here and there in both films. In Tower of London, where Vincent Price and Basil Rathbone have that drinking contest. Richard, I could outdrink you, and he ends up in the vat. So there's some comedy relief, but it's not funny screwball comedy. It's kind of uncomfortable comedy like you throw in. So he had a gift of comedy, I think, like James Whale did, Court.
Well, also with Son of Frankenstein, and you talk about the comedy, you see, it was a tradition at the Universal to bring back certain actors, even in parts as villagers and whatever. And of course, Michael Mark is the guy in the jury box, and Bela Lugosi spits in his face. Remember, and he goes, "Ah, he spit on me," and Lugosi, "Ah, bone stuck in my throat." And it's wonderful stuff. And Roland V. Lee would take advantage of that. He respected the tradition of the other movies. I think that's what also made uh, a great difference with Son of Frankenstein is it didn't just go willy nilly in all directions and everything else. Roland V. Lee respected James Whale. He had worked with him. He knew him. He said, "No, these if we're going to carry these on, it has to be a tradition that we honor." And of course, he did that, and naturally too. Uh, One of the great moments in the movie, or rather, it's an interesting moment, I should say, not perhaps not that great, but Ward Bond plays one of Lionel Atwill's police officers, and he yells at Bela Lugosi in one scene. And Ward Bond was a pretty prominent character actor by that time, like 1939. So you always are kind of left wondering, is there more to that part, or was there more going on with Inspector Crow than we've seen in the final movie? Because you weren't going to pay Ward Bond that money just to come in for a few hours. So uh, I've always wondered about that because just like with so much was cut from Bride of Frankenstein with Dwight Fry's role, uh, and he was, all the stuff with him sneaking into bedrooms and killing people and all that stuff. That was all taken out. And I always wondered if there was not more to what was going on with Lionel Atwill's role, and did they decide to also trim it down?
That's another show, Court. The Universal, what was left on the cutting room floor
Yeah, exactly.
of
Yep.
these great horror films. But let's move on to our next director. And he only directed two Universal horror films, but they're two bona fide classics. So of course he's in the top tier, and that's Lampert Hillier, who I remember first seeing him when I was a kid, his name on the credits of all the Addams Family episodes. So, as we said, a lot of these directors, after that Universal horror era ended, went on to television and they directed, TV westerns and TV comedy. So that's where I first saw him. But of course, the two Universal horror films he directed are classics: The Invisible Ray and Dracula's Daughter. Dracula's Daughter is just an atmospheric masterpiece. Court, where did he get his ideas for atmospheric horror and to take it to such a level?
That is one of the great questions of the ages. I have no idea because Lambert Hillier was a Western director. He was doing Johnny Mac Brown and Tom Mix pictures and going all the way back to the silent era. He even directed William S. Hart. So, how he fell so completely in sync with his subject matter and did such a beautiful job in both two more movies shot by George Robinson, by the way. And boy, he just did a fantastic job on them both. I mean, the man knew what to do with the script. And of course, now that whether or not the two Universal horror films, but he's also known as the guy who first brought Batman to the screen because he directed the Columbia serial. And he did a lot of television as he got older, and those were the opportunities that were presented to him. But boy, he had his eye in Dracula's Daughter is incredible, and that movie is so good and has such an incredible feel to it, and the way he used Gloria Holden, and it's just and just an incredible piece of work. And Irving Pitchell is her assistant, who is, she keeps trying to break away from the curse of vampirism, and he's telling her, no, it's useless. You're a vampire. Get used to it. Live your life as a vampire. And just wonderful, wonderful stuff. And of course, the scene where she seduces Dan Gray is, one of the great scenes in Universal horror history.
Yeah, it's a great seduction scene. And we'd be remiss if we didn't mention he did also The Invisible Ray, which is a Karloff Lugosi pairing. And I think that film just looks like it's almost like a 12-part serial packed into 70 minutes. It's got everything. It's got, the horror of or the science fiction of Radium X, which can, the Karloff touches, and whoever he touches, they die. And it's also a revenge because the Radium X has made Karloff go crazy and jealous that he thinks people want to steal it from him. And and he's got his wife. Oh, it's his wife, played by what's her name, Cord?
Oh, we'll think of it here in a second.
She's in Mad Love.
Yes. Um, I ought to
Uh,
go in the other room and look at my half sheet.
wow, I can't believe we're both tongue tied. Anyway, beautiful girl,
Yes.
and he's losing her, and then his mother wants to get involved. It's all over the place, and you got the natives who are, they don't want to touch the thing, and his dog gets the Radium X, and it's a great movie. So those two are classics. Court. I mean, if you're going to direct two Universal horror, it's got to be those two.
Well, and the thing is that is actually my favorite Karloff Lugosi pairing. I don't know why, because everyone always refers to the Black Cat, but boy, it just something about it just really. I love the science fiction aspect of it. Here's we're gonna. This is yeah, this is terrible that we couldn't think of this.
Right?
And
Oh, it's Francis Drake, Court.
Francis Drake, thank you. And the the stuff with her and Frank Lawton is, and he's not a useless young male lead. I like that about the film, and their romance seems very good and very credible. But the John P. Fulton opening was seeing the asteroid and it crashes into Africa and all of that stuff and that beautiful Ken Strickfaden machinery and those the gorgeous art direction. Uh, it's just incredible. And that shot of her crossing over that small bridge to Janos's laboratory, and the wind is blowing her cape in all directions and everything. It's just gorgeous stuff. Absolutely wonderful. And yes, some people say, well, it feels too much like a Tarzan movie, which I can understand their feeling about that as well, because it is, the inner reaches of Africa, and you've got native runners and all of that stuff. But I think it's a tremendous movie, and it has a bigger feel than any other Universal horror film, certainly made at that time, with the exception of Bride of Frankenstein.
Right. No, it's a science fiction horror film, which is very rare. And of course, we had that big telescope, so it's got
Oh yeah.
everything. It's a real classic. I enjoyed it as well. And let's see, our last director of the top tier court is, even though he didn't direct a lot of Universal horror, just the fact what he did direct, and even though one or two of them is non-Universal, they're just classic. And we're talking about Robert Florey, Murders in the Rue Morgue and The Beast with Five Fingers. And it's, as I said, murder. They're both non-Universal. Oh no, Murders in the Rue Morgue is Universal, isn't it, Cord?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, right. Duh. Anyway, Murders in the Rue Morgue is so horrific. I mean, take away the fact it's an early guerrilla movie. I mean, right? I mean, it's better than Lugosi's The Ape Man, but it's classic and it's turn of the century and it's gothic and it's got the tilted angles, and Robert Florey oozes German expressionism. I mean, I don't know if you got to know him or talk to him before he passed, but a very interesting guy who knew how to make a good horror film, Court.
Well, the thing is with Robert Florey, first of all, John Huston wrote the screenplay for that version of Murders in the Rue Morgue, and he always said that they had really captured Edgar Allan Poe, and I was always like, really? And then I saw the recut. They had restored the film to the way Florey had originally done it, using his shooting script. And why Universal reordered scenes, cut other bits and pieces out of the movie, I mean, they mutilated it. And the version that now exists, and it's on certain collections, it's not on every collection, you have to look for it, is fantastic. It's like an entirely different movie. And it's so good and so interesting. And the going back and forth to the morgue, actually, rather than there's just those little moments in there where they're trying to find the girls' bodies and stuff. It's wonderful. And again, here's another case of really stepping around the censors because Arlene Francis is a prostitute and she gets picked up, taken to Lugosi's laboratory, tortured, and hung up on the you know uh, by her ankles. And Lugosi is furious with her because she has syphilis.
Yeah, tainted blood. She's on
That's right.
she's on his gallows,
On the yep on his petard, and that's the thing. He says your blood is as black as your sins,
and he just tosses her in the
and
river, which
he
predates
sure
Human
does.
Monster.
Yep, it's and to see though now that the thing has been recut the way it was intended to be, that we see Lugosi in that way before he's ever introduced to Sidney Fox and all the other things, completely changes the movie and makes it a million times better. So I would just encourage anyone who wants to see this movie to seek out that version of it, which was actually on a British Lugosi collection and is now kind of I mean it's a little spotty in its availability, but wow, what a difference! And I can see why John Huston thought so highly of that version because that was what he wrote.
Right. And as I said, you see behind me, he's directing Beast with Five Fingers, another creepy movie. And I think Robert Flores should have directed more for Universal. Um, I mean, he did turn down Frankenstein, did he not? He was actually slated to
Well,
direct it, right, Court?
he was the original director, and he had a lot of input into the script. Of course, supposedly, that he had seen, the bakery sign with the windmill outside of his hotel room, and that's how he came up with the idea for the ending of the film with the burning of the windmill. And and of course that was retained. But with Bela Lugosi turned the part of the monster down, I think Universal kind of came back and I think the wind kind of just went out of the project just a little bit, and Flory stepped back on his own, and they said, "No, you'll get your own film." And of course, it was another. Lugosi was not going to play the monster, and it was quite a bit different concept than the version that they handed to Boris Karloff. So he ends up doing another movie, with Bela Lugosi. So he does Murders in the Rue Morgue. But Flory was again he was an everyman. He could really direct, in all genres. Of course, uh, probably his biggest financial success was a huge hit at Warner Brothers. God is my co-pilot, and he did The Beast with Five Fingers because he had done the Universal horrors, and Peter Lorre got into a little trouble with Warner Brothers because he was doing an interview and he was probably in his cups a little bit. And they said, "Well, tell us about your new movie." "Oh, you mean the one where I'm co-starring with a goddamn hand?"
Right.
And that was published. And Jack Warner and these guys are going, "Oh God, here we go." And Kurt Siodmak was not happy with Peter Lorre's casting because he had actually written that role for Paul Heinried because he wanted it to be more of a regular person rather than anybody with any sort of a genre identification because Peter Lorre had already done Mad Love and all these things, and Siodmak felt like, well, of course he's going to be a crazy maniac because he's been in all these other movies playing that part. But I think
Right.
Laurie is wonderful,
He
and
is. It's
for any of us who bought the Ken films, Super 8 black and white with titles version in the 1960s, I got mine from Captain Company. It says Lori on the box.
right. Peter Leroy. You
Yep.
know, to me, it's yeah, it's almost like a sequel to Mad Love, Dr. Gogol, but he has hair this time, and his hand. He's got the his killing, and but it's a great film, and that's Robert Flores. He finishes off the top tier of Universal horror directors. Now there's a few guys, a few directors who are in the middle. How many do I have? I have four in the middle, and we'll start with Lou Landers, Louis Freelander, and he was a very competent director. Court, The Raven, which is one of my favorite Lugosi films of all time, Return of the Vampire, and we'll even throw in The Mask of Daijin, Court.
Yes.
And great films. He's a very competent director. The Raven is a classic. I mean, it's right up there with all the. It's a short movie, a little bit over an hour, but we've discussed this film before, but I mean, it's just from the dialogue and the action and the torture sequence and the Edgar Allan Poe devices, and it moves. It doesn't stop, and the overnight stay at the house. So I mean, Lou Landers. Whenever I would watch an old horror film and his name would pop up, you're in for a treat because he was a very competent director, Court.
You're saying something profound. Uh, I I really like the real, and that was Lou Friedlander's. That was his first feature,
Right, so go
and
figure that, yeah.
yeah, he did a really wonderful job. But it feels like a serial almost. And what's odd is the look of the movie is not very elaborate, despite some of the interesting sets and stuff. And the movie actually cost more than The Black Cat. And just comparing the two movies side by side, you wouldn't think so. And but Landers was quite good. He went over to Columbia, and they put him to work. He was doing Boston Blackie movies and uh, contract director stuff, and then it does Return of the Vampire, which of course is one of the few horror movies from World War II where the war really plays an important part in the story. And of course, here Armand Tesla, the vampire played like Lugosi, is in fact resurrected because a bomb goes off and it dislodges the stake in his chest. And it's a really good movie, and kind of a has a brutal sensibility about it, which I think The Raven also has. And of course, The Raven, because of the sadism and all the rest of the implied stuff and everything else, is the movie that brought the British censors down on horror films and called for a ban of U.S. horror films for several years, and that's what put Bela Lugosi out of work for so long.
Right. And let's move on to another gentleman court, Ford Beebe, who is another really talented director. I mention him because anyone who can make the Phantom Creep serial deserves to be in my list. The underrated Night Monster. I mean, sure, Lugosi doesn't have much to do, but it is an atmospheric, creepy film. And of course, The Invisible Man's Revenge, which is a great film as well. So he has those three films, Court. So I think Ford Beebe's a little unheralded. He's a very competent, talented director.
Well, he was a publicity flack going back to Universal's silent days. And so he had a long, long history with Carl Laemmle and with the studio. And when the studio changed hands to Charles Rogers and these different guys in the late 30s, he stayed on as a producer, and a very good one. And in fact, I just wrote a little thing about Night Monster to a friend because Alfred Hitchcock saw it to see what Janet Shaw who plays Millie the maid, who is one of the Night Monster victims, if she would be right for a small role in Shadow of a Doubt. And he was really impressed with the movie and how quickly Ford Beam had to get it made. I believe it was shot in 14 days. And Hitchcock was like, "Wow, boy, you guys did a great job." And he did cast Janet Shaw is in Shadow of a Doubt in a very nice small role. And he was a really, he was old school. This guy could really do it. And if he was put in charge of a picture, then they had confidence that it would be done not just quickly, but also well. And his father in law was the British actor Cyril Delavanti, who was in so many Universal horror movies. In fact, he's one of the body snatchers at the beginning of Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, and he's the old gatekeeper in Night Monster. And actually, in an episode of the Dick Van Dyke Show, he plays Dick Van Dyke's grandfather. That's Ford Beebe's father-in-law.
Right. He's in the that scene in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman where you
Yep.
see the wolf bane and the hand creeps up and grabs Cyril and he goes, "Help me!" Or
Yeah.
yeah, and of course he can't be helped, and his other fellow grave robber takes off.
The scariest moment for me in the classic Universal horror catalog. That sting of music. And interestingly, you see, I always thought this was such a great touch when you see Lawrence Talbot's hand come up out of the crypt. His fingernails have grown
Yeah,
as they do in death, and just wonderful stuff. Just great. And yeah, Ford Beebe, he was quite a guy.
yeah, he was very talented director. Next up, court is Roy William Neill, who's probably more well known for directing most of the Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes films. Great flair for atmosphere, eerie fog, the old dark house, because Holmes is always going to some old dark house with a chessboard, and or he's going to go visit, 12 old rich gentlemen, and they're all being knocked off one by one, and it's very atmospheric and witty dialogue, and the banter,
House of Fear.
or House of Fear, of course, and the banter between Holmes and Watson is always fun. Also, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. So tell us about
Incredible.
Roy William Neill, Court.
Well, Roy William Neill, again, Jay, we're speaking about these directors, and very few of them, Todd Browning being one of the exceptions, is an American. And Roy William Neill, I believe he was from Scotland, and had been under contract to Columbia. Did quite a few films there, including the incredible The Black Room, starring Boris Karloff and Catherine DeMille. Just an amazing movie. And again, how they got around the sadism and the perverted situations in that movie, and they avoided all the censorship problems is really pretty remarkable. It's a wonderful movie. And when he moved to Universal, one of the reasons they wanted him is because he was a close friend of Basil Rathbone's. Universal now had contracted with the Arthur Conan Doyle estate to continue the Sherlock Holmes series. The ex-film editor John Rawlins had directed the very first Universal Sherlock Holmes, which was Sherlock Holmes and the Voice of Terror, and which is actually quite good. And Roy William Neill stepped in to take control of the rest of the series. And in fact, the last three, he also three or four he produced. So they trusted him implicitly. And boy, when he went in on Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, because he had directed Lon Chaney before, and just like all these Universal guys, they were always, given different assignments and things. And he had directed Lon Chaney an interesting movie about a car theft ring called Eyes of the Underworld. And so they thought, okay, he could handle work with Lon. Let's do Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, and George Wagner thought it was a good idea. He knew Roy William Neill was a good director, and I just think that the fact that that film is criticized over the years, oh, it's the first of the monster rallies and all the rest of the stuff, nonsense.
Right.
It
I was
is,
gonna. I
but
was gonna.
the fact that the thing gets slagged at all is absolutely incredible to me because that
Right.
movie has great stuff in it, just wonderful. And good lord, the Wolfman scenes alone, make it worth it. And you've got Alona Massey as a really effective female support, and Patrick Knowles, and of course the great standbys from people like Lionel Atwill. Uh, just just fantastic. And Lon Chaney Jr. has never, I don't think, physically looked as good in any Universal horror movie as he did in that film.
No, it's because people always focus on Lugosi lumbering around as the monster, but atmospherically, it is up there with the best of him. It's
Absolutely.
with Son of Frankenstein and Ghost. I mean, it is you know they're going. It's always back to the same town, right? To court is back to Visaria, and
Yep.
but that scene, as we discussed earlier, with Cyril de Levante and the other guy with the Wolfman coming out, he looks like he's asleep. I mean, that opening scene, with the raven up there and the graveyard, and of course, fee do dee da da day, and the monster comes lumbering down the town. I mean, it is nonstop, Court.
Oh yeah, and you've got Martha Vickers as the Wolfman's first victim. You see her in the saloon, and when Maria Osmanskaya comes in, we are trying to find a doctor who can help people other doctors cannot help. And everybody gets upset, and you know it's uh, it's just tremendously good. And the other grave robber, by the way, is Jeff Corey,
Jeff
and
Corey, that's right.
and it's just this, and again another Universal horror movie with this fabulous visual palette photographed by George Robinson.
Right. So there was in good hands during the time, as I said,
Oh
from
yeah.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but from Browning and Whale to Wagner to Kenton, to Reggie, to Roy William Neill, it's just and then all those other guys. It was in good hands, and it still would be until I guess till 1948 with Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein being the last one. So let's move
Well,
on to another director, Court, and this guy really didn't do a lot of Universal horror. But the two that he did do, Court, if you're going to do two, The Mystery of Edwin Drood and the totally underrated Werewolf of London, which predates the Wolfman, and we're talking about Stuart Walker, and just two great atmospheric films. Edward Drood, Claude Rains does a great performance. Not, I don't think there's enough coverage of Edward Drood. I don't think that film is talked about enough. Great dramatic performance in that film, and of course, Werewolf of London. In its own right is a classic. Court. I know. I think Werewolf of London is one of your favorites, isn't it?
oh, absolutely. And the thing is, so, a director like Stuart Walker, uh, not that much different, if you will, even though during the 30s, and of course, like Earl Kenton's status kind of shifted the longer he was at Universal, even though doing House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula and all that stuff. Walker was he was like a prestige guy, or certainly a B plus guy, and he so to have him come over and do those movies, I think was seen as a little bit of a coup by Universal, and also too, I don't think we can discount Henry Hull uh, participation in the way Werewolf of London was made. As you know, he had quite a few demands and insisted on a different style makeup because the original makeup, as we've seen some of those original Jack Pierce sketches, was very close to the Wolfman. And Henry Hall was like, no. and it wasn't actor vanity, in as much as uh, he thought, no, you've got, if the character is going to have any sympathy at all, he has to be recognizable as me, as the doctor. And I think everybody agreed with that approach. It's a very interesting makeup, and it is more human than the Wolfman, and he is completely recognizable as Henry Hull. And I think people have kind of unfairly tarred and feathered Henry Hull as if he was just throwing his weight around arbitrarily, but that's just not so. And he does a beautiful job in that movie. And the fact that you know, his lovely bride is getting ready to go fool around with somebody, we feel bad for him. But he's got that Mariface lupina to take care of, so he's got to pay attention to the plant and Dr. Yagami.
Right. You do feel he is a sympathetic character, like it carried on into the Wolfman with Larry Talbot. You actually feel sorry for the Henry Hole character. He's trying to come up with a cure, and in the meantime, right, his old lady's kind of got eyes for another guy, and then Warner Olin gets involved, and they have a great fight sequence where he gets clawed in the face. Uh, Two great movies, and Stuart Walker handled them both nicely. Anyway, our last director in this, I guess, the middle tier is one of the Siodmak brothers, Robert, and he did two films: the Cobra Woman, which is okay, but the totally atmospheric classic of Son of Dracula, which is completely underrated. I mean, now it's getting some more respect as the years go on. But because people thought it was silly with these coming down the bayou in the canoe, or in the boat. But I think that's masterful. And we've discussed this film before at length, and it is creepy, it is weird, it's got vampirism, it's got ghosts, it's got a dead woman coming back trying to convince her husband everything's okay. She says, "We can still be together. I'm dead and I'm a vampire, but we can still be together, and don't worry about Count Alucard." So great dialogue, and just too good. As I said, Cobra Woman's okay, but let's just concentrate on Son of Dracula and what that movie stands for, Court.
Hey, I see you living in a grave married to a corpse.
Great dialogue.
Oh, Queen Zimba,
She
you can't
steals the
argue with
film,
her.
Court.
And well, the thing is with Robert Siodmak, he was doing well at Paramount. He came over to Universal. His brother Kurt never really forget. They had an odd uh, relationship, a lot of sibling rivalry there, and Kurt never really forgave his brother for taking him off of Son of Dracula and bringing in Eric Taylor, which I don't know. I don't think that was just Robert's decision alone, because Eric Taylor ended up fashioning a really good script on Son of Dracula. And there are moments in that thing I love. There's that great shot above the bat that's flying over Robert Page as he's stumbling through the cemetery. And we're following them both simultaneously. Just terrific. And Cheney floating in the water after his resurrection is just terrific. And there's been a lot of course, criticism about Lon Chaney's performance because he decided not to do a Hungarian accent, which I think it was smart. And this is a real bestial Dracula. I mean, he throws Robert Page around like a rag doll. And the the sense of, if you will, and they emphasize that Dark Oaks is an estate that's kind of from another era. That's why Louise Albritton wants to live there with Count Alucard and everything else. That it's hidden away and separated from the modern world. Because even that we see part of the modern world, we see the train station, we see the courthouse, uh, and Robert Page drives around in a car. But then there's a part of the film where it seems like it could be in the 1800s, and just wonderful. And the situation with Robert Siodmak, because he was so talented, was Roy William Neill dies, and so Robert Siodmak is asked by Mark Hellinger to take over the direction of the Killers. And that's what made Robert Siodmak's career in the United States.
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, he's done a lot of great other non-horror films. Let's not forget that at all. Killers is a masterpiece in film noir. But Court, you want to mention anything positive about Cobra Woman, or is that just a time filler?
Oh, Cobra Woman is terrific. Uh, First of all, of course, the parallels with the Nazis and the cult around the Cobra Woman and all that stuff, beautifully photographed in Technicolor. And with Lon Chaney as Hava the Tongueless, and it's one of those terrific Arabian Nights movies that Walter Wanger was making for Universal. And it should be noted that the screenplay was by Richard Brooks. This is long before Elmer Gantry and In Cold Blood and Blackboard Jungle and The Professionals and all these fantastic achievements he had. And when he was under contract to Universal and he was working on those films, and he also was working on a serial, Don Winslow of the Navy, he went in to pitch an idea to a Universal producer, and it was going to be for another Maria Montez John Hall movie. And he said it takes place in the 1600s. It was a pirate film, and the producer, I won't use a euphemism, said, "The 1600s. When the hell was that?" I always love that. And Richard Brooks said, "Well, that's when I decided to join the Marine Corps," which is exactly what he did, and wrote a novel while he was in the Marines called The Brick Foxhole, which was turned into the brilliant movie Crossfire with Robert Ryan and Robert Mitchum. But those Arabian Nights films, there's just feasts for the eyes. And Siad Mack knew it. And so he looked at he was a Maria Montez and John Hall are just going to do what they're going to do. I'm going to make this beautiful Technicolor feast, and your eye can go all over the place. Of course, you have Lois Collier and all the beautiful dancing girls and guys with scimitars and beautiful sword fights and all this stuff. But it's just everything is coming at you visually, and that was all Robert Siodmak. Maybe it was to you know divert attention from the silly screenplay, which has a lot of people in it doing a Nazi like salute to the Cobra Woman. And of course,
Right.
we take care of her before the end of the movie.
Right. Yeah. It's a no, it's an okay film. It's not one of my personal favorites, but it is what it is. And you summed it up. It's a good Technicolor film. So, Court, let's get to our honorable mentions on Universal horror directors. These are the guys who weren't as big or big as name in the genre for Universal, but they still competent, talented guys who fulfilled their contract and they directed these type of horror films. And the first one we'll talk about is James P. Hogan, Court, who did one film, and it's a doozy, one of your favorites, The Mad Ghoul.
You
And
bet.
we've talked about it before. We dedicated quite a long segment to it, but it bears repeating. It's just it reeks of just universal horror. It's atmospheric. It's sad. It's thrilling. It's a film noir. And James Hogan handles it really well. It's a shame he didn't do any other films for Universal.
Well, he died so young,
Oh,
or
that's
younger.
true. He did. Yes.
And
At
the thing is, too,
53
yep.
Court.
And the thing is, too, about the Mad Ghoul is it was written by a woman. And Brenda Weisberg, and it is so gruesome, just remarkably so, with cutting out the hearts and using the hearts to make the brew to keep the zombie alive and all of this stuff is just uh, really a sick idea. And the thing about the Mad Ghoul that I think really makes it noteworthy is there was a fantastic example of a production looking at what else was being shot around the lot and taking advantage of that. There are scenes in hotel lobbies and restaurants and things like that with a lot of extras and these elaborate sets which have been built for other productions, and they film there. And the Mad Ghoul has a, and of course, they also, the ending was shot on the Phantom of the Opera stage. And yeah, I really like that movie. And I'll say this, and you and I are both in agreement. Poor David Bruce. He's in love with Evie Anchors, but she now prefers Turhan Bey, which pisses off George Zuko. Uh, but more than anything, any other character, I don't think in Universal Horror gets screwed over as badly as David Bruce does in The Mad Ghoul. This guy just gets his head handed to him. This poor guy loses his girlfriend. He, you know, becomes a ghoul. He has to, oh my gosh, hey, just really zap him to pieces. And he's just a nice, regular guy, and man, they just tear him up.
Yeah, and then he's breaking into cemeteries and cutting out hearts, and he's just yeah, he's just the fall guy. And in the end, of course, it all ends bad. I mean, it's just very sad. But you know what? That's what made this film. It wasn't your typical, he was just a mean monster. He was sympathetic, kind of like the Frankenstein monster. Walking around like a ghoul, just, watching his woman go, and he's being bossed around. He has no control, and it's a terrible thing. Um, let's move on to our next director, Cord, and that's Harold Young. And Harold Young did three films for Universal: The Mummy's Tomb, The Frozen Ghost, and Jungle Captive. The one that I think matters is The Mummy's, at least to me, is the Mummy's Tomb. And The Frozen Ghost isn't bad. It's not bad at all. But The Mummy's Tomb is the atmospheric one. It really shows a talent. So Harold Young had the capabilities to also be a Universal horror director, Court.
Oh, well, Harold Young, he was British and he had been cutting movies for Alexander Korda. So he was working on these huge films like Drums and The Jungle Book and Thief of Baghdad and all this stuff, and as an editor. And he comes over and they put him on, they did the usual universal thing. Okay, you're going to direct Hiya Chum, and you're going to direct uh, this one and that one and, these comedies and with Shemp Howard and things like that. And then they put him on The Mummy's Tomb, partly because there was a fair amount of stock footage from The Mummy's Hand that was going to be incorporated. But that movie, again, photographed by George Robinson and a beautiful job. That movie is so underrated and has so much great stuff in it. My God, uh, the scene where the mummy confronts, they they get into the fight in the alley, and it's just it's absolutely just terrific. And then the house catches on fire is wonderful, and it looks terrific, and it's just over and over again. Now, some people, I got to speak to Turhan Bey, and they said, well, Lon was dissatisfied with the part, and he was complaining all the time and stuff. He said he never heard anything from Cheney about it at all. They sat around and talked between takes, during the whole making of the movie, and he wasn't, you know, upset or you know anything like that. And Wallace Ford, of course, he and Cheney were very, very good friends. And Wally Ford, in fact, had played with Cheney in the West Coast Company of Mice and Men. And Lon always credited Wally Ford for getting him into that production because that, of course, is what opened the door for him to do the famous Lewis Milestone movie. And Wally Ford played George in that production. So they already had this great symbiotic relationship. And again, that scene where he corners him in the alley and Wally Ford hitting him with lumber and doing all that stuff, it's a really violent confrontation. And it's terrific. And one thing we should definitely get clear because they said, well, Cheney was drunk and he did this and he did that. Okay. There's always been this legend about him banging Elise Knox's head against a pillar from the giant iron gates that enter the cemetery. Eh, wrong. That's not where it was. It did happen, but remember, Cheney only had one eye, and it happened as he was bringing her through the door to the crypt, this narrow doorway, not this wide thing with these iron gates. So I that's always annoyed me because it's like, oh, look at like, my God, the same thing happened with Ben Chapman and Julie Adams in The Creature from the Black Lagoon when he banged her head against the cave wall. I mean, these guys are wearing these heavy rubber things and they're clear, don't have clear vision and whatever. So I'd like to dispel that rumor if possible.
Okay.
And but it's a very good movie, and boy, another George Robinson photography job, and boy, does it look good. But
Yeah.
Harold Young was good.
He was. He's very talented. And along the same lines, all these guys, these last few guys we're going to talk about, we're in that same category. And Christy Caban is another one. Uh, I think he worked with Karloff in Graft, which was done the same year as Frankenstein, 1931, and The Mummy's Hand, and Cobra Woman. So let's talk about the Mummy's Hand and even Graft. Graft is just one of those early kind of crime films, and it's very atmospheric, Court.
Well, Cabani had a career going back to the very early silent days, and he and Raoul Walsh were D.W. Griffith's assistant directors. And so he had a long, long history before he started directing at Universal. And like a lot of these guys, he had been doing two reel comedies, he had been doing, westerns, he'd been doing a little bit of everything. So for The Mummy's Hand, which of course now that really has nothing to do with the Mummy. That's always been the thing. The Kairos films were not related to the Karloff movies. And so, and I believe that's a still from Scared to Death. And so Cabani directed The Mummy's Hand on leftover sets from James Whale's Green Hell and did a very efficient B movie job. He was a real workhorse. And I think he did a really nice job on that movie. Scared to Death, of course, is noteworthy because it's Bela Lugosi's only color film. But that's kind of an odd mixture of all kinds of stuff. It's almost hallucinogenic. It's so bizarre. And but Cabani was a real good, if you will, fellow to execute these movies. And again, Mummy's Hand moves like a serial. It just moves like a shot.
Oh, the Mummy's Hand is incredible. I love the Mummy's Hand. It's under I think it's underrated in the Kari's films. It's really atmospheric and spooky and terrifying. It really is, especially if you're in that time period. Because, whenever we review films and stuff, it's not like you and I are sitting here in modern day. I like to think about, if you and I were doing this show in the 40s or the 30s, it's like everybody would be like, "Ooh, I got to go see this," and there'd be a line around the block. And but Christy Cabani was very competent, of course.
And of course, it had the wonderful John P. Fulton optical of the black eyes of Kyrus.
Right. That black
And
eye that went on to. They even made the masks with the one eye back
yep,
when they did that. They made a
but
couple of
yeah,
those.
the animated eyes was yeah, that was good. It was really distinctive.
Right. So let's move on to our next, I guess, honorable mention, Court, and he's the very talented Joe May, who did The Invisible Man Returns and the Sherlock Holmes House of Fear. Both very atmospheric. Invisible Man Returns, I think, is completely underrated. It's a very good film.
The
And
the Joe May House of Fear is not the Sherlock Holmes movie
okay. Well, thank you for correcting me on that one. So let's concentrate on The Invisible Man
because
Returns.
yeah,
Um,
Basil Rathbone hated Joe May.
oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
And yeah, he directed him in a movie at Warner Brothers that was a remake of a German film that he had made. And he was so specific with Rathbone. No, my the German actor, I forget who had starred in his original film, moved his left hand up past his shoulder and didn't go any further than that. And you went further than your shoulder. And Rathbone was just infuriated by this and really, really disliked Joe May. Uh, but Joe May was talented. I know I asked Vincent Price about him, and he said he could see why, because he was very specific about what he wanted, which made him perfect in the eyes of, say, someone like John P. Fulton, because he was going to be so exacting in the way he approached his work that it made things like integrating opticals into shots and all that kind of thing that much easier because he really was specific about body placement, movement, and all the rest of this stuff. So nothing was left to chance, which made him ideal for an Invisible Man movie.
Yeah, no, it's a really good film. It's atmospheric. Vincent Price is great in it, and Nan Gray, of course. So I mean, yeah, I mean these guys that we're going to talk about, these were the ones that filled up the gaps. Who directed these films? I mean, that's what they're named for. I mean, yes, they directed other films in other genres, but this is what they were. We're talking about them now. We're not talking about their other films. We're talking specifically about their contribution, whether it's one or two films, to the Universal lore. Which brings us to Leslie Goodwin's court. Only one film, but it's a good one. It's The Mummy's Curse. It's one of our favorites.
Well, Les Goodwin's is another one who was back to the silent days, and he was, as you know, primarily a comedy director. And lots of two reelers, lots of two reel shorts, and what have you. And there is that kind of Max Sennett moment in The Mummy's Curse where Cheney's coming up on the car and, you know, uh, they don't see the mummy kind of coming down the road after them and they drive away. That's always been a little bit silly, but there's some wonderful stuff in the movie and the climax of the film where he kicks apart the old temple and the monastery is really something and very brutal. And Martin Koslick was not happy with Lon Chaney because he said he got too physical with him, but you see it on screen, and it's wonderful. And of course, you have the great resurrection of Virginia Christine coming up out of the swamp as the brand new Ramsey Ames. Now that she's Princess Anaka again.
Right. No, when she clears the dust out of herself, and she's disorientated, and she's walking down, almost in a daze. It's one of the great scenes in horror and universal horror history. You know how there's different great scenes, and
Yep.
you can say this was the best scene in Frankenstein or in Dracula or the Wolfman. In the Mummy films, seeing Virginia Christine just lumber, she's been spent, I don't know, how was it, a couple hundred years or a couple thousand years
An
under
eternity.
the, yeah, in the dirt, buried, alive. There's no coffin. She just pops out of the dirt. I remember watching that as a kid on the Channel 5, Movies Till Dawn, and I remember that scared me.
Hey,
So that's one of the great films, and of
the
course
mummy's in the
Leslie,
swamp and he's dancing with the devil.
right, and so that Leslie Goodwin is very competent to bring that to light. Moving right along, Court, we got Phil Rosen. Phil Rosen brought us The Sphinx with Lionel Atwill and Mystery of the Marie Roget. And of course, we can't forget Spooks Run Wild with Bela
Yes.
Lugosi and the East Side Kids. Phil Rosen, competent director, didn't really get to do a lot for that time frame, but I think he's worth mentioning. He's in the honorable mentions for those three films.
Well, and also, didn't he direct The Strange Case of Dr. RX?
I think he did. I might have left that out.
And but Rosen was an interesting guy. A Mystery Marie Roget is kind of the standout his uh, from his catalog because I think they wanted to start a series based on Edgar Allan Poe's stories. And of course, Mystery of Marie Roget is a semi sequel to Murders in the Rue Morgue as written. And as Edgar Allan Poe was kind of inventing the detective genre. And it's a very well made movie. I think Patrick Knowles is wonderful, and you have Maria Ospinskaya, of course, and you have Maria Montez. Uh, and it's a good movie. It's a very solid movie and very well made. And Phil Rosen was also a Monogram guy, so he was over at Monogram directing Charlie Chan movies, and he did direct the East Side Kids and whatever. So he was a guy that they would hand a script to, and he could execute it. But when he had to, if you will, bring his A game to do something a little more atmosphere and do a little bit, would spend a little bit more money for a better product, he could do it. Uh oh, we lost you again.
He was a very competent director. Sorry
There
about
you
that,
go.
folks. We're going in and out, little technical difficulties. But no, Phil Rosen, very good. He did most of the Charlie Chan movies, and very atmospheric. He knew how to move a film along, and that's why he's in the honorable mentions of this. And of course, Spooks Run Wild, which is if you just look at it as a fun film with Lugosi, then you'll enjoy it. But it serves its purpose. Okay, let's move on to Wallace Fox Court. Wallace Fox, um, he did The Corpse Vanishes, and he did Pillow of Death and Bowery of Midnight. Those are his three. Pillow of Death is quite atmospheric, Court.
It is. And, you know, the thing with Pillow of Death that separates it from the other Inner Sanctum movies is Lon Chaney did it. It wasn't one of these, oh, I was, I don't know what happened. I have amnesia. And did I really kill someone and all the rest of this stuff? No, he did it. And he did Wally Fox was a good director. And I had an interesting encounter about him, of all people, with Harry Carey Jr. because his dad had worked with Wallace Fox any number of times, and I gave him a big little book of one of the movies, and he just started talking about Wally Fox as just one of the great standby monogram directors that everybody wanted because his history was so long, especially with westerns, and he knew everybody and he made everybody comfortable and he could get through those productions so well. And in fact, when we did the Inner Sanctum set uh, at the time, Universal did not have HD material on Pillow of Death. Now that's all been corrected and all this stuff. But it was interesting because Pillow of Death kind of remained, if you will, the shaggy dog of the Inner Sanctum movies. And of course, when it was wrapped, that was also kind of the end of the B movie production at Universal. There are a few others that limped along right then, but the studio had been sold or was about to be sold to International Pictures, and they started to pink slip a lot of the people who are involved with the B movie production. And of course, during that period, also Jack Pierce was pink slipped.
Right.
So Pillow of Death has a lot of history to it, actually.
It's a really good film and entry in that excuse me, in the Inner Sanctum series. And of course, we'll give one last mention of The Corpse Vanishes, which we've talked about in the past, which is a fun movie with Lugosi at his best. It could be one of his, with the Human Monster, probably one of his better. Uh, the Corpse Vanishes and The Invisible Ghost as a kind of a double bill to end that. Okay, our last honorable mention, Court, on this tribute to the Universal horror directors of the 30s and 40s is Joseph H. Lewis. And basically, he did The Mad Doctor of Market Street.
He
And so
sure did.
that's why he gets mentioned. And it's a fun film. Not really horror per se, but kind of a mystery thriller programmer. And it's got an interesting twist. So tell us about Joseph H. Lewis as we wrap up our last Universal Horror Director Court.
Well, no, Joe Lewis, uh, bounced around a little bit. He was at Monogram for quite a while, The Invisible Ghost, of course, and became so well known for his film noirs like The Big Combo. He was a real talent. And Mad Doctor Market Street, which I have the half sheet hanging up in my living room, uh, is a really fun movie. I mean, it just flies along, and it's a jungle picture, and it's a Mad Doctor movie, and one of a true vehicle for Lionel Atwill, which Atwill is not the support in this movie. He is the star of this movie, and Joe Lewis just just terrific. And uh, I remember I went to see him at Los Angeles County Museum, and they were doing kind of a tribute to him. And uh, the wonderful director who did L.A. Confidential, Curtis,
Hanson.
help me, Curtis Hanson, was asking questions. And I got up and I asked Joe Lewis to talk about uh, working with Bela Lugosi. Well, Joe Lewis was an old man by this time, and he would get a little confused. And so there's Curtis Hanson. He's asking the questions because he couldn't hear what people were saying in the audience. But Joseph H. Lewis would respond as if Curtis Hanson wasn't translating what was being said from the audience, but as if he himself was asking the question.
Mhm.
So Joseph H. Lewis, I asked this question, and I'll talk about directing Bela Lugosi. So Curtis has he repeats the question, and Joe Lewis goes, "Ah, come on, Curtis, I've talked to you about that a million times." That was the answer. So I never got to get any insight, but that was a wonderful moment. And he did sign my big combo half sheet.
Well, that's what matters, Court, that he signed it. But I hope this episode for you monster kids out there, you Universal monster kids, I hope this was a crash course in Universal horror directors. I mean, Court with his inside scoop on what drove these guys, their legacies, how they got started, what got them the gig, and the talent that they brought to these Universal horror pictures. I mean, as I said, we knew the Todd Brownings and the James Whales and Robert Flores, but did you know about these other 17, 18 other gentlemen who, made really good monster films? I mean, some of them were on a lower end or B grade scale, but they're a part of the oeuvre of Universal horror. These gentlemen made these
Absolutely.
films, and they are rarely talked about. So Court and I, many moons ago, decided to do this special show so we could showcase them and give them their proper due. Any closing words, Court?
No, Jay, I'm so glad you decided to do this because if nothing else, if it encourages folks to go out and discover the work of these directors, whether they stay within the horror genre, they say, oh my gosh, this guy directed one of my favorite westerns or a great crime movie, which all these guys did terrific work in film noir. And, they were journeymen. They did what they were asked to do. And so applied these wonderful professional standards to whatever the assignment was. And if it was a monster picture, so much the better. And we're the ones who benefit from all those great efforts.
Right. And it was a great club. It was a brotherhood of 20 or so directors, a lot of them European immigrants who followed German Expressionism and used that knowledge that they learned or maybe watched themselves and brought it to the sets, whether the films were shot in a week or a couple months, and whether they were with Lugosi or Karloff or Rathbone. They had an idea and they had a script and they followed it, and they're just fun. And so we remember them and we salute them and we thank them for making such great horror films. So, Court, thanks.
Absolutely.
Yep, I want to thank you for bringing us your knowledge and wisdom on the genre. And I'd like to thank everybody out there for watching. All our episodes are archived on YouTube. and you can check them out anytime you want. You can even binge watch them. So that's what I advise you do. There's about 20 episodes. Go and watch them all in one sitting, and you'll know everything almost as much as Court, and maybe I do. So, Court, I want to thank you once again, and remind everybody to join us next time on the Classic Universal Horror Podcast. Boris will take us out as always. And Court, thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
You got it. Thank you, Jay, so much.
No problem. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you for joining us. Join us next time when we'll cover other topics like universal horror, Poverty Row, and profiles on people like Bela Lugosi, John Carradine, Peter Lorre, and even on myself. Until next time, stay scared.